No matter how many times you do this, you shake. So just, I'm going to be shaking. Hi. Hi. Okay. So 5 years ago, the day before my 50th birthday, my family and I held a celebration of life for my younger sister, Beth. She had died 2 months earlier, and she'd been 47 years old. And for now, all I really want to say about her death is that it was sudden, and that her heart stopped beating. And in a very real sense, a part of my heart stopped beating too, because when you think about it, and as you probably know, when you spend decades with somebody and you lose them, it's nearly impossible to imagine life without them. I mean, we created a life together. We created language together. We created our own language. And this one language that we created, we called it Ang. And it was a language where you put the letters A-N-G in front of any audible vowel. So if I were to say hi, I'd say hang guy. And if she were to say hello, she'd say hangalango. And if I were to say something like, you better get out of my room right now, or I'm going to tell Mom and Dad that you just wrote all over my Andy Gibb poster, it would go something like this. Yangu, Bengetinger, Genget, Engout, Engov Mangai, Rangum, Rangait, Nangau, Angor, Engai, Engam, Gengana, Tengel, Mangam, and Dengad, then get Yangu, Rangoat, Angal, Engovinger, Mangai, Engandingi, Gengib, Pangostinger, Engo Kenge, Genget, Engout, Nangau. So. Got it. So I've missed my sister, and for these last 5 years, I've been managing grief and longing, and also quite a bit of an identity crisis, because before she died, I'd been the oldest of 3 sisters. And then when she was gone, it was suddenly like, well, now am I the oldest of 2 sisters? Well, no, she's still here. But the challenge for me was that I couldn't find a way to express my grief and my longing and my pain in a way that felt like I wasn't burdening others. And that was on me, because everybody in my life was so supportive. The problem was, I wanted to talk about her all the time, and I wanted to relive our memories constantly. And then something kind of miraculous happened, but first let me back up. In 2017, the year before Beth died, I did one of those at-home DNA tests on a lark. I did it because I really wanted to know, like, what are the chances of me getting bunions? And, what should I expect, from a percentage-wise if I were to eat asparagus? Never mind, I don't need to tell you what all my things were. But I got my results back, and everything checked out. I mean, there was no kind of like surprises. Everything was exactly as I expected. I still was Polish and Irish and Norwegian, so I never opened the tab that was marked family tree. I knew who I was, and that was it. So I closed the database and put my results away for 5 years. And then around this time last year, I just happened to open the 23andMe database, and I tapped on the family tree tab. And on my family tree, I saw a name that I didn't recognize. And under that name, it said likely half-sister. And I was really confused, and I thought, well, obviously this is a mistake. It's a cousin, or it's, something's goofy. But it actually turns out that this woman and Beth and I share a biological father. And for now, all I'll say about him is that he's no longer alive, and that there are a ton of questions that still need to be answered about a lot of things. But the woman and I decided that we had nothing to lose by meeting, and that we'd only have things to gain and to learn about each other, and maybe even about our own lives. So we decided to meet. And 1 month later, when she walked in the door and I saw her for the first time, What I was not expecting was to see somebody who had the identical body type as my late sister Beth, and the same shiny brunette hair, and the same sparkling blue eyes, and fair complexion, and megawatt smile. So in 2018, I lost one sister, and in 2022, 4 years later, I found a sister. But the thing that really blew me away is that both of my sisters had been named Elizabeth at birth. So Elizabeth and I are now building our own relationship and building our own language. She calls me Sissy, and I call her my sister gift. We both say I love you when we hang up a Zoom call or end a text. And I, of course, added her birthday to my calendar with a reminder every year. And I know that whenever I see that date, it will always be in my mind our amazing, miraculous celebration of life. Thank you. I have one more. This one was called Transit when I first did it for the moth, but I prefer to call it Trainwreck because it's more accurate. And I did this one in February of 2018. On March 10th, 1993, I survived an actual train wreck. I was a 24-year-old advertising executive, and my boss and I had a business meeting in Michigan that day, and since the weather was just awful, we decided to take an Amtrak to get from Chicago to Battle Creek. The highways were a slick of ice, and it seemed like a much safer thing to take the train that day. So as we neared our destination, we'd just pulled out of the Kalamazoo stop, and I remember that my boss and I were laughing. He was seated at the window, and I was on the aisle. And then all of a sudden, the train's horn just starts to blow. And this doesn't faze me at all, actually, because I've lived around trains all of my life. I mean, growing up, there was a freight line that ran through my backyard in River Forest, Illinois. It was the Sioux Line, which is a phonetic nickname for the Minneapolis-St. Paul Sault Ste. Marie Railroad. And trains would rumble past on the Sioux Line, shaking our house all the time, and I loved it. I mean, to me, the sound of an approaching train was exciting, and it served as a reminder that there was a world outside my own. But I remember specifically one time when I was 8 years old and my sister Beth was 6, and we climbed up the hill to the tracks, and we put these little trinkets and treasures and pennies on the rails, and we couldn't wait until the trains rumbled through so we could examine everything that had been flattened and smashed and destroyed and altered forever. And sometimes those trains rumbled through so often that we'd just climb up and sit on the hill, or we'd stand at a safe distance from the tracks, and we'd wave to the engineers who'd honk their horns at us. Usually they were playful little, you know, toot-toots kind of thing, and we'd wave, but sometimes they were super loud and cautionary horns blaring, as if to say, like, you know, careful girls, what the hell are you doing up there, unattended, where are your parents, kind of a thing. So when that kind of horn sounded, it pierced the air and it made you jump, and in those moments I would grab Beth's hand, partly because the sound startled me, but mostly because I wanted to make sure that Beth was safe. So after a locomotion and its cars would rumble through, we'd take our little flattened pennies and treasures, and we'd run inside the house and we'd line them up on coffee tables, and we'd watch TV and we'd memorize commercials. That was sort of our thing that we did. Mr. Microphone was one of our favorites. And for those of you who remember, you know, hey, good looking, we'll be back to pick you up later, kind of a thing. That was always fun. But the commercial that I remember in its entirety, that I don't even need paper for, is the Blue Star Counterfeit Diamond Ring. It's flawless, full of fire and brilliance, dispersing a blaze of spectral colors like tiny rainbows. A 1-carat center stone surrounded by 4 smaller stones. Yes, an expert can tell the difference, but practically no one else can. And You know, it comes in a man style too. Rings of similar quality are sold for as high as $50, but for a very limited time, we are offering this ring to you for only $14.95 or 2 for $28. So order now and include your ring size. So, so we would memorize commercials all the time. That was our thing. And I mean, seriously, isn't the brain so funny? Why, after I'm 55, and how have I remembered that commercial verbatim ever since childhood? I just, I can't even. Wait, no, I know why I memorized it, so that I could one day make strangers in Glenview laugh. It worked. But also, it's just amazing to me that all my life I'd locked the sound of train horns in the same file folder in my brain with those fun and happy, playful memories with my little sister. And so, in 1993, when I was riding on that Amtrak with my boss, our train's horn started going off, but this wasn't anything like I had ever heard before. This time, the horn was urgent and it was sustained. And as it was happening, I didn't know the reason that the horn was blowing and blowing and blowing. But in the years since that day, I've become a journalist, and so I now know all the details. There had been a tanker truck that was a quarter mile ahead of us that the engineer could see, and the truck was on an icy slope, and its brakes had locked up, and it was carrying 1,000 gallons of propane gas. And so as the engineer of our Amtrak could see, the truck was about to cross in front of us. And so as the horn kept going off, I kept giving my boss a look like, what is going on? And then the impact happened. I was thrown from my seat, as were many people on the train, and we all hit the ground hard. Trying to right myself, I was so confused because my body was moving in such a way that I was not in control of. It was not intentional, it was unfamiliar, and I had no idea what was happening. And when we hit the propane truck, the explosion sent a blast of flames 3,500 degrees through the train, all 4 cars, above our heads. At the time, I had no way to understand that our train was literally covered in fuel. I mean, imagine a 60-mile-an-hour train on fire, barreling through an accident site. So my life flashed before my eyes, and I'm sure that the same thing happened for the truck driver, although he, unlike me, did not survive the crash. The engineer on our train had the wherewithal, despite burns on the upper part of his body, to keep going, and he did not stop our train until the engine and all 4 cars were through the inferno and the length of 10 football fields beyond the crash site. And in doing so, all 46 of us were able to walk off the train essentially unharmed and theoretically able to go on with our lives. So immediately after the crash, my boss and I took a taxi to Kellogg's where we had a presentation to give. And we made our presentation to the client on schedule, albeit smelling like a gas station. And the crash, it seemed, was behind us. I mean, even before the sun set that day, it wasn't discussed. There was no internet then to Google what had happened. There was no way for me to look up the interview that I'd given to the local media as we were coming off of this burning wreckage. I remember reporters and a camera guy swarming us as we came out, shoving microphones and lenses in our faces, trying to get our immediate reactions. And I have no recollection of even what I said. We were all in shock. And in the absence of any media to replay that trauma, I was able to bury it. I just put it away. So for the next 25 years, I wrestled with survivor guilt for sure. And also with this insatiable need to understand what the meaning was in having walked away from this experience. Rationally, I knew I'd survived, but I never felt comfortable calling myself a survivor. I mean, I didn't do anything to get off that train. Somebody else did the work of saving us, the engineer, and somebody else died in the process, the truck driver. I didn't die, and I didn't do anything to save anybody. So I had a hard time understanding what my role was in this whole circumstance. And so I never talked about the accident. End of story, right? No. So 23 years later, in 2016, my life basically became a train wreck for multiple reasons, and I hit a depression that was incredibly profound. But during that whole dark period, the thing that kept coming up so annoyingly in my memories and in my emotional turmoil was the train accident, and I didn't understand why. I kept thinking to myself, why now? What's the point of these memories popping up? They had nothing to do with my current situation, and so I decided that I'd just keep going through what I was going through, and I'd figure things out. And I worked hard, I mean, really hard, to push those memories down and just bury them deeper. And what I didn't realize was that I was suffering from intrusive thoughts caused by unresolved trauma and PTSD. What I also didn't realize was that research now shows that by keeping trauma and even secrets tucked away inside, we get sicker, we struggle in our relationships, and we experience more anxiety and depression than those who process and express those challenging, uncomfortable, upsetting experiences. And so for the past 7 years, I've been writing my heart out. And I became a memoir coach, and I do live lit like this. And these days, I spend my time validating and listening to other writers' life experiences. Now, I encourage people to bring their struggles and their stories to the page. And maybe in a small way, I found a little bit of purpose from that accident. That Amtrak engineer who knew enough to keep us moving forward, he saved my life. And writing has saved my life too. I'm so honored and grateful to help others embrace writing as a tool for healing, as it's helped me. 7 years ago, when I fell into that depression and the life I knew jumped the tracks, so to speak, I finally began to learn the importance of self-care and of self-love and of self-compassion, self-forgiveness, and most of all, of speaking my truth. I can also say now I am a survivor, and not just of train wrecks. I mean, I've survived a difficult childhood, a sexual assault. I survived periods of intense anxiety and depression, and I can talk about it with people I don't know. I've survived massive imposter syndrome. I don't know if anybody else ever deals with that, but I deal with it all the time. And as you can see, I've managed to survive navigating life at just 5 feet tall. So I think it goes without saying that I am without a doubt a beast. So a few months from now, I'll head to Arizona, where I'll host a retreat called Write to Heal, where we'll address our deep, challenging memories in a safe and warm space. And exactly 1 week from now is actually the 30-year anniversary of the Amtrak crash, which is on Friday, March 10th, 2023. And on that day, I plan to get up early, drive down to Union Station, board the Amtrak Wolverine, the same line I rode on the day of the collision in 1993, and pass directly over the crash site where so much was once lost. And as an advocate of writing to heal, you can bet that I will have my pen with me. Thank you.